Hello, my name's Glenn Kirby. I am the Technical Manager for Syngenta UK and Ireland, and we're here today at Griffin Nursery, a working nursery, to talk about formulation. Formulation is a really important part of products. It helps us get the very best out of them, makes them more effective, makes sure we can tank mix them properly and they don't foam when they're in the tank. We're really lucky to have Alex here from Syngenta. He's a formulation chemist and he is going to talk through some trials.
Hi, I'm Alexander Bassett-Cross, a formulation chemist, and I'm going to explain why formulation is so important. For example, like making a cherry cake. If you can think of all the ingredients you would put in a cherry cake. If you don't get it right, you can undercook it, or you could have all the cherries and fruit crash out at the bottom of the cherry cake, and that's not what we want and ideal. And that's why we spend a lot of time and effort in formulation to make sure that we get a stable product delivered to you in the grower.
So Alex, what is an AI?
An active ingredient is a molecule that our chemists at Gellert Seal or Stein have discovered in their research centres that is active on a weed, a pest, say a fungicide or an insect, and they will kill or stop those pests from invading the crops and causing damage.
And it's kind of the engine of a product, really, isn't it?
It is the engine of the product. This is where most of the activity comes from. The formulation the reason for formulating it will extract the maximum potential out of that active ingredient, and that allows to not have to apply so much to a crop and the field, but so we meet modern regulations, but it also makes we get the best efficacy out of them.
So Alex, how do we know how much active ingredient to put in a product?
So early on in the research phase, biologists will take some of our active ingredient from the research centres and they go around the globe and they will test it in a range finding exercise to understand how much we need to apply to a crop or in any situation to control the pest or the disease in that area. It's really important for that tells us how much product we need to put in a formulation. So that could be as small as 5 grams a litre or as much as 250 grams depending on the strength of or potency of the active ingredient. And that also helps our regulators pull the package together so that we can sell this product, get our registration to sell it in a market.
So the active ingredients are so good in these products that they make up quite a small percentage of the bottle. What else goes into that bottle?
So I'm glad you asked that question. So yes, an active ingredient isn't the main constituent in there. As you can see on the table we have here in front of us, there are a lot of individual components that we would use. Because what we have to do is ensure that this active ingredient that we have here is evenly distributed across the whole crop or area we're treating. And whether that's a small amount or a large amount. So actually having a small amount of active ingredient in a product can be quite tricky to we have to stabilize. That's why we rely on all the other additional components to help stabilize the product and then be able to ensure that we can distribute that AI evenly all over the crop. So today, Glenn, I'm going to use my table of contents here to demonstrate how we make a suspension concentrate, or some of the key components in the suspension concentrate. So we call them an NSC, and what that means is we suspend our active ingredient in water, and therefore that will be used in a tank, mixed with water in a tank and be sprayed.
Okay.
So naturally, our active ingredient that we've been talking about earlier on, they are hydrophobic. Now hydrophobic means they're water hating. That means they don't want to naturally mix with water. So we have a challenge to start off there. So what happens is, if we get this example out, when you mix your active ingredient with water, you can see that it sits on the top. And I can give it a bit of a shake, and you can see now I've got lumps and it's really not liking to go in there.
So that doesn't look very good. So how do we take that and we turn that into a decent product?
So we typically start off with a Weta. Now a Weta is a surface active ingredient. This will coat the particles with surfactant and then therefore allow us to mechanically process that active ingredient further to then start the start of a process for our product.
Mechanical processing, tell us why that's so important.
Okay, well I'm glad you asked that because I can take you through that process. It's really important. We use beads, so I've got some examples, different sizes ceramic beads here, and then we've also got some glass ones there. So our biologists, during that research phase where they're working out how much active ingredient we need to apply, will also work out what size we need the AI to be to control that pest or disease. So typically A fungicide will need a particle size of maybe 1 to 2 microns. Something to control mosquitoes, maybe 10 to 12 microns. Now, a particle size of 1 to 2 microns or 10 to 12 microns is a rather obscure concept to most people, but if you imagine if you wanted something 1 centimetre versus 12 centimetres, that's quite a large difference. So we will use that knowledge that biologists have given to us with the right, and choose the right size of beads to mechanically mill the product. So for my demo, I'm going to explain, this could be our bead mill. We have our beads in our chamber. We will also have, there'll be paddles or blades in there that will help, which will be rotating. So there's a motor driving this, so it's all churning around. We will pump our product, or our, not our product, but our active ingredient with our Weta in and the milling aid through the milling chamber and collect it the other side. We'll then use a piece of equipment to measure that particle size. So once we've completed that processing, we have achieved the right size, we then have something called a mill base. So this is not our final product. So this will be typically a concentrated 50% active ingredient to water with some surfactants in there, as we mentioned before, starting point of our formulation. And this is where we really then take on and what we could say formulate it up into a product. And this is where all our range of other components come in. So typically during manufacture we will create a lot of foam in the product. Now foam's really important for obviously the grower. You don't want foam. We all know what happens when you have a foamy product in your tank. Foam's out the tank, it's not good, it doesn't help with applying. We also have problems within formulation and manufacturing where foam in the mill, for example, or in our mixing vessels, we can't have. So we use things called anti-foams. So an anti-foam is typically a silicon based thing. You get them all over, you get them in diesel to stop diesel foaming, but we use it to suppress the foam in our product. So I will demonstrate adding some anti-foam into our foamy products, and then we'll move on to talking about the other components. So what we've done here, we've taken our active ingredient and we've put it in our water to start making our mill base. And as you can see, discussing it's not wetting in, it's hydrophobic, it's on the surface and it's sticking to the edges. It's not going to go, and it doesn't like being in that water. So what I'm going to do now is add our Weta in, which will help those particles wet into the water and then help us to mill. Bit of gentle agitation and you can start to see those particles are going in. So if we continue shaking, you can see we start to form quite a bit of foam. Now this is no good for you to apply the product in the tank and also for us to process. So we will add some anti-foam to help control that. So add some anti-foam in. As you can see, the foam is collapsing and we're controlling the foam, and even if we agitate it more, the foam collapses straight away. So this is the foam is controlled in this product. The particles are nicely dispersed, and now we can start to mill. So now we've got what we call our mill base, and before we can make our suspension concentrate, which is our final product, we need to stop these particles settling out. So we've milled them, we've made them really fine, we've coated them in a surfactant to keep them separated and help us mill. What we haven't done is put anything in their product to stop those particles acting and gravity settling to the bottom. So why is that important to stop it settling? Well, it's important that the product is homogeneous, i.e. consistent all the way through. So when you take a sample out, if you're sampling all the time, it's the same at every level you've taken out over the period of time you're using the product. So we will use typically things like a thickener gel or a anti-settling agent. It's sort of solid, but if I give it a little shake, you can hear it's gone liquidy, and then it pours quite nicely around. So that's quite good.
Well, that's fascinating stuff. And so once that gets into the bottle, how does that help the customer?
Well, this is quite unique. What this is, these are sort of plates of clay, and they have a different charge on the surface, on the top and the bottom versus the edges. And so if you've ever been a kid and stacked your cards up, you know, playing cards, it's a similar sort of effect. You get this packing of all the charges stick, and that's why when I first had it, they'd all organised themselves in a nice structured way that kept it sort of not solid but structured. And then a little bit of shaking broke that structure down and then allows this to flow as a liquid. And what we're trying to do is achieve the same effect, not so thick obviously, but in our product, to give some structure to stop those particles settling to the bottom, but to keep them stable, that we can then, you know, a gentle shake as advertised in the packet, then you can pour it into your mixing hopper. Other thickeners, so for example this thickening the gel, they're typically like spaghetti, so they create they're long chains and they just form a matrix as well. We will use a combination of the two to get the right structuring for the AI. Different AIs have different densities, and different densities will require more or less structuring depending on the amount in the product to stop that settling.
So that's really interesting and actually really useful for a lot of our growers, because a lot of our growers, when they're using product, they'll buy a litre and they'll only use small amounts of it throughout the season because they've got small or specific needs. So to hold it in solution for a long period of time, really useful.
So another thing to consider when we're making products is we look at adjuvants. Now adjuvants, we've talked about them as they're also known as surfactants, about keeping the particles dispersed in the spray tank, but we also look at it for increasing the activity in the product on the plant. So for example, a leaf, you think about a leaf, your skin is designed to protect us, or for this case the plant, a waxy surface to protect it being attacked. Now funguses, they attack that surface. What we need is we need to make sure our active ingredient is either in the leaf or on the leaf. So we use adjuvants to help with that, whether that's to stick to the leaf surface or penetrate it. So for instance, if we have an insect like a caterpillar eating your crop, we could penetrate the insecticide into the leaf surface or stick it to the surface, so when they eat that leaf, they consume the pesticide and it's going to then kill that caterpillar. The adjuvants we get come in all sorts of ranges, sizes. They can be powders, they can be liquids. As you can see here, we've got the very runny liquid. Typically they're viscous because of what they are, but you can get some really thick ones. Now I know today is quite warm, so this is loosened up a bit, but that's really quite thick and treacly. These obviously handling issues for us on the manufacturing plant is important, but we can warm them up and handle that. But it's really important to make sure we get the right adjuvant and the right concentration and build it into the pack. This helps the grower and it helps target and really bring out the maximum performance of our AI that we were talking about earlier on, that's targeted for these pests, but we can really extract every piece of potency out of it and use that to increase the yield of the product or protect them.
So we've got here our fully formulated product, which we've done a great job on. What else can we do to add value and really improve that for the grower?
So I'm glad you asked that, because we're almost there. So as you alluded to earlier on, our grower will take a litre pack of this by, and they will come and take some out, use it, reseal it, put it back on the shelf in their chemical store. What we need to do is ensure every time they open up that can, it hasn't got any bacterial contamination. It was the environment around us had lots of bacteria, yeasts around, and they will love the thickeners that we put in, and they would typically invade that and then munch away at it, and then we end up with all our AI will settle out, we'll get mold, it's not good. So what we'll do is we'll put a preservative in, just a very small amount, but that will make sure we maintain that shelf life as advertised on the pack. Another thing we need to do in the final part is thinking about where's this product being used. Some countries are very warm, some countries are very cold. Typically cold countries we may get some freezing things. This is water. Water freezes at 0 degrees. So what we will do is we'll put an antifreeze in there. It gives us a wider window where that temperature can drop down. So when it sits in the chemical store, when they pick up that packet, it's homogeneous, it's flowable, it hasn't frozen, and we maintain shelf life.
So the important thing with formulation is to understand what formulations you're going to put in your spray tank and how to add them to your spray tank in the right order, so to get the best out of them. And there's a simple way of remembering this for www.Wales mixing sequence, and you can find that on our website as a downloadable PDF. So the W stands for water. It goes into a clean tank first. Make sure you fill that tank up with clean water to about half full and start your agitation. And the next W stands for water soluble bags, to mix it into clean water, so you mix that in. And the next W is add a wettable powders. Any wettable powders you've got, put that in next. And then the first W of Wales, that's your water dispersible granules. Add them in at this stage. Maintain your agitation, which is the A, and this allows all those dry products to be mixed uniformly in that tank. The L stands for liquid flowables and suspension concentrates, The E then stands for emulsifiable concentrates, and then the S, finally, add any solutions or soluble liquids in at the end. Make sure it's fully agitated, top it up with the remaining water that you require, and you're good to go. So next time you open a bottle of Syngenta product, have a think about the formulation and all that effort that's gone into there. We've worked really hard to make it easy to use. We've worked really hard to optimize it so you get great coverage over the leaf and across your plants in the nursery. And we've worked really hard to optimize that active ingredient in there.